Even now, Tom Cruise still moves through Hollywood like a man built for cinema in its biggest form. In 2025, he was honored with a BFI Fellowship, the British Film Institute's highest honor, while Mission Impossible. The Final Reckoning kept his name tied to the kind of large-scale movie stardom that very few actors can still carry on their own. He does not just survive the changing industry, he seems to outrun it. For decades, Tom Cruise has looked less like a normal celebrity and more like a machine designed for speed, discipline, danger, and total control. That is why people kept calling him one of the last true movie stars. He did not simply appear in blockbusters. He became the reason they felt like events. But Tom Cruise's story was never only about victory. What made him so fascinating was the contradiction hiding inside the image. On screen, he often looked perfect for the role Hollywood wanted most: handsome, relentless, charismatic, impossible to ignore. Off-screen, he built the same reputation: disciplined, precise, almost frighteningly in control. And then, for a period of time, that image began to crack in front of everyone. The man who looked engineered for absolute command suddenly started making the public uneasy. The smile stayed the same. The star power stayed the same. But something in the myth shifted, and once it shifted, people could not unsee it. That is where this story really begins. Not with a struggling actor, not even with fame, but with a man who had already conquered Hollywood and then somehow became stranger, harder to read, and more unsettling the bigger he got. Because Tom Cruise did not rise, fall, and disappear like so many stars before him. He did something more unusual. He cracked in public, survived it, and kept running. The real question is not how he became a legend. The real question is how a man built to look untouchable ended up revealing in full view of the world just how fragile a perfect image can be. Before Tom Cruise became the face of control, he grew up inside instability. He was born Thomas Cruise Mapothery IV in Syracuse, New York, and his childhood was shaped by frequent moves, dyslexia, and a home life that left deeper marks than the public image of a future movie star would ever suggest. Years later, Cruise described his father as a bully and a coward, a man who taught him anxiety before he ever learned fame. That matters because it changes the emotional core of his story. Tom Cruise did not come from a life that looked glamorous, protected, or destined for Hollywood. He came from a childhood where motion itself became survival, moving towns, adapting quickly, learning how to endure. Long before the world saw him running across screens, he was already running from something much older and harder to name. For a while, acting was not even the plan. According to biography.com, Cruise enrolled in a Franciscan seminary at 14 and briefly considered becoming a priest. But by 16, a school production of Guys and Dolls changed something in him. The stage did what ordinary life could not. It gave shape to the energy, fear, and hunger that had been building underneath everything else. Soon after, he dropped out of high school, moved to New York at 17, and took odd jobs to support himself while chasing acting full-time. That decision is where the real Tom Cruise story begins. Not with fame, but with escape. He was not walking toward acting because it looked safe. He was moving toward it because it offered a way out of confusion, out of weakness, out of the smallness of the life he had known. Hollywood, even before it opened its doors, already looked like a form of self-invention. His early path was fast, but not magical. He made his film debut in Endless Love in 1981, followed by supporting roles in Taps and The Outsiders. Then came Risky Business in 1983, the film that gave him widespread recognition and turned him from another young actor into someone Hollywood could suddenly imagine as a star. What made that transformation so powerful was the contradiction inside it. The screen version of Tom Cruise looked bright, confident, and impossibly watchable. But underneath that surface was a young man who had built himself against disorder and who seemed to understand very early that charm could become armor. That is why this part of his life matters so much. Before he was Hollywood's perfect weapon, he was a boy trying to outrun chaos. And once fame finally found him, it only gave him a bigger stage on which to keep running.
What happened next was not just success, it was acceleration. After risky business made Hollywood notice him, Top Gun turned Tom Cruise into something much bigger than a promising young actor. The film was a massive box office success, and Cruise suddenly stopped looking like a newcomer fighting for space. He looked like a phenomenon the screen had been waiting for. That shift matters because Top Gun did more than make him famous. It made him cinematic in the most aggressive, crowd-pleasing way possible. He had the face, the grin, the speed, the confidence, and the kind of physical energy that could make ambition itself look seductive. But what made Tom Cruise more dangerous than other rising stars was that he did not stay trapped inside one type of role. Even in the middle of becoming a commercial sensation, he kept reaching for films that gave him more weight. The Color of Money and Rain Man helped widen the image, suggesting there was more under the surface than just youthful charisma. He was not simply building fame, he was building authority, the kind that lets an actor stop feeling temporary and start feeling inevitable. By the end of the 1980s and into the 1990s, Tom Cruise had done something few stars ever manage. He became both critically respected and massively commercial at the same time. Born on the 4th of July gave him one of the defining dramatic roles of his career and earned him an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. Then came A Few Good Men, The Firm, An Interview with the Vampire, each one reinforcing a different part of the machine. The intensity, the legal thriller precision, the dark glamour, the confidence that he could walk into almost any genre and make it orbit around him. Jerry Maguire pushed that power even further. It gave him another Oscar nomination and proved that even when the material softened, even when the film leaned into vulnerability and romance, he could still dominate the frame without losing control of it. That is why this period matters so much. Tom Cruise was no longer just becoming a star. He was becoming the kind of actor Hollywood could use as a guarantee, not only that a film would open big, but that it would feel important the moment he stepped into it. And then Mission Impossible changed the scale of everything. When Cruise took on Ethan Hunt in 1996, he did not just find a hit franchise, he found the perfect machine for his mythology. It let him combine everything he had been building for years: control, risk, discipline, movement, and the sense that he was willing to turn his own body into part of the spectacle. Over time, that franchise would become one of the clearest expressions of what Tom Cruise really was at his peak. Not merely a movie star, but a Hollywood weapon. He could sell drama, but he could also sell velocity. He could carry prestige, but he could also carry scale. And because he kept choosing projects that fed both sides of that image, the myth around him became unusually strong. He did not feel like an actor passing through eras. He felt like an institution. That is the hidden darkness of this rise. The bigger Tom Cruise became, the less room there was for him to be anything ordinary. By the time the 1990s ended, with Magnolia adding yet another Oscar nomination, he had become something almost impossible to sustain. A man expected to be brilliant, bankable, fearless, and perfectly in control all at once. And once the world gets used to that kind of perfection, even a small crack starts to look like a disaster. The crack became visible in 2005, and once it happened, the public never looked at Tom Cruise in quite the same way again. For years, he had been one of the most controlled men in Hollywood, precise, handsome, efficient, almost too polished to seem spontaneous. Then came the now infamous appearance on The Oprah Winfrey Show, where he jumped on the couch while declaring his love for Katie Holmes, and the moment hit pop culture like a rupture. What should have looked like joy looked, to much of the audience, like excess. What should have felt romantic felt unnerving. Even people looking back 20 years later described the couch jump as a moment that signaled a shift in Cruise's career and in the way the public consumed celebrity. That is what made it so powerful. It was not just a weird TV clip. It was the first time the myth of Tom Cruise, the cool, disciplined, untouchable movie star, suddenly seemed unstable in broad daylight. He was still famous, he was still magnetic, but the image no longer felt perfectly sealed. For the first time, people were not just watching Tom Cruise the actor, they were watching Tom Cruise the question mark. Then the strangeness deepened, because the couch jump was not an isolated moment. It became part of a larger public phase in which Cruise's intense identification with Scientology began reshaping the way he was seen. Britannica notes that his outspoken support of Scientology proved controversial, especially in 2005, when he publicly denounced psychiatry as an illegitimate science. That controversy became even more visible in his heated exchange with Matt Lauer on NBC's Today, where he argued against psychiatric medication and criticized Brooke Shields for using antidepressants to treat postpartum depression. People reported at the time that Cruise declared he had never agreed with psychiatry, while history summarized the exchange as the moment he raised eyebrows nationwide by calling psychiatry a pseudoscience. This is the real emotional center of Tom Cruise's public unraveling, because it was not scandal in the usual celebrity sense. He was not being exposed for addiction, crime, or financial ruin. He was doing something stranger and, in some ways, more damaging. He was turning the public image of Tom Cruise from a movie star into a source of discomfort. The more forcefully he spoke, the less people heard confidence. They heard obsession. And once a star who was built on control starts making audiences uneasy, every smile begins to look slightly haunted by whatever they think they are not being told. By the time Katie Holmes filed for divorce in June 2012, the image had shifted so far that the breakup felt less like celebrity gossip and more like confirmation that something fundamental around Tom Cruise had become hard to contain. ABC News later reported that Cruise acknowledged in a deposition that Scientology played a role in the divorce, and earlier coverage from both ABC News and People showed how quickly the split became entangled with public questions about the church and the life surrounding him. This is why Tom Cruise's drama was always different from the usual Hollywood collapse. He did not disappear into rehab headlines or self-destruction. He became alien. The audience did not stop recognizing him. They stopped feeling sure they understood him. That is a much more dangerous kind of rupture for a star whose entire power had once come from seeming flawlessly legible on screen. The hero, the winner, the man who always knew exactly what he was doing. After 2005, and especially after 2012, Tom Cruise still had the face, the body, the ambition, and the box office instinct. But the mythology had changed. He was no longer just the perfect star. He was the perfect star who had let the world see something unsettling underneath the perfection. And once the audience sees that, the image can never go back to being innocent again.
What makes Tom Cruise's ending so unusual is that he did not repair his image the way most public figures do. He did not sit down for long confessional interviews. He did not explain himself into forgiveness. He did not try to soften the myth. Instead, he chose something far more difficult and, in a strange way, far more ruthless. He rebuilt himself through movies. Over time, the public stopped talking about the couch jump first and started talking about the work again. Edge of Tomorrow reminded audiences that he could still be sharp, funny, and physically relentless. But the real turning point came with Top Gun: Maverick, which did not just succeed, it became the highest-grossing film of his career, crossing roughly $496 billion worldwide. That mattered because it proved something larger than box office. It proved that Tom Cruise could still turn spectacle into trust. The audience might not have seen him as innocent anymore, but it was willing to believe in him on screen again. And from there, he pushed the mythology even further. In 2025, the BFI awarded Tom Cruise its highest honor, the BFI Fellowship, recognizing the scale and longevity of his career. That same year, Mission Impossible. The Final Reckoning kept him tied to the kind of theatrical event filmmaking he has spent years defending, while Guinness World Records officially verified that he completed 16 burning parachute jumps for the film's stunt work. That detail matters because it reveals the final shape of Tom Cruise's survival. He did not ask the audience to trust his personality. He asked it to trust his commitment. Again and again, he turned his own body into proof. At some point, Tom Cruise stopped functioning like a normal actor promoting projects and started functioning like a believer in cinema itself, someone who seemed determined to hold together an entire idea of movie stardom through force of will, discipline, and risk. So maybe that is the real ending of Tom Cruise's story. Not redemption, not collapse, reinvention through endurance. He began as a boy running from instability, became Hollywood's perfect weapon, then let the world see the strange and uncomfortable fractures inside the image. Most stars do not survive that kind of rupture at full scale. Tom Cruise did, but he survived by becoming something colder and more singular than before. He is no longer the effortless golden boy of the 1980s or the flawlessly legible superstar of the 1990s. He is something stranger now, a man who turned his own legend into a mission and kept outrunning the damage through cinema. That is why his story lasts, because Tom Cruise did not simply remain famous. He found a way to make survival itself look cinematic.